Nearly 150 men digging trenches and building dams.
Time after time they tried, only to find that courage was not enough.
A light coming out of the water. That was one of the most sort of reassuring and wonderful sights.
Centrally coordinated within the British Cave Rescue Council, there are no less than 15 operational, completely voluntary cave rescue teams. Derbyshire Cave Rescue Organisation, North Wales Cave Rescue Organisation, Irish Cave Rescue Organisation, Scottish Cave Rescue Organisation, the Cave Rescue Organisation, South and Mid Wales Cave Rescue Team, Swaledale Cave Rescue, East Cornwall Search and Rescue Team, Devon Cave Rescue Organisation, South East Cave Rescue Organisation, Gloucestershire Cave Rescue Group, Midlands Cave Rescue Organisation, Mendip Cave Rescue, Upper Wharfdale Fell Rescue Association and the Cumbria Ore Mines Rescue Unit. Since the first teams were formed in the mid-1930s, they have dealt with over 3,000 incidents involving at least 4,000 people and 700 animals. Of course, all the outcomes are not happy ones. Over these years, something like 455 people were injured, of which 81 died. But without these rescue services, far more would have not survived. Inevitably, the more tragic the outcome, the more sensational press coverage it often gets. But it's also true that the most tragic incidents are often the ones that encourage the teams to reconsider their procedures and to improve. In March 1959, a caving accident in Derbyshire was to make the need for properly organised cave rescue teams in Britain dramatically apparent. The location was Peak Cavern, where a young caver had become severely jammed down a narrow and awkward dog-legged vertical fissure. His name was Neil Moss. He was a student at Oxford University and had enthusiastically accepted an offer to join an exploratory trip into the cave. A week or two earlier, a group of cavers had discovered a previously unknown and well-decorated chamber. Halfway up a flowstone slope, there was a narrow vertical crack, which had not yet been fully descended. Bob Toogood, then only 17, was one of those original discoverers and part of the team that returned with Neil Moss. 40 years later, he returned with caver and filmmaker David Webb.
We put the ladder down the shaft. Right. And Neil volunteered to be the one to push it.
Aided by gravity, Neil slid down the narrow shaft to reach a boulder blockage at 40 foot down, which he tried unsuccessfully to clear. When he tried to climb back up, he had difficulty getting through the squeeze.
So at this stage we tried pulling him up on the ladder with his feet in the ladder. And we pulled him up to the point where the ladder presumably jammed, and also to a position where he was more or less jammed in the narrow bit of the shaft.
After attempts to move Neil Moss failed, it became obvious that help was needed. Bob went out of the cave to alert senior, respected BSA members, including Ken Pearce and Les Salmon.
Ken Pearce took over, being a very forcible character, and says, "Down the hole, Bob." So I climbed down the hole, taking a rope down with a loop in for Neil Moss to put over his head and shoulders. But I just about got down to the very tight bit, just above him. And said to Ken Pierce, who was following me down to do the pulling, I said, there's something wrong with me, Ken, I think I'm going to faint. And Ken said, put that rope round you, and I put the loop round me, and more or less that's the last thing I remember until Ken was dragging me over the top of the shaft.
By morning the press was onto it. Then the BBC, at the request of the police, put out a message that experienced cavers were needed. They were. As oxygen bottles began to arrive, they needed to be manoeuvred through difficult sections of cave passage. But at the same time, national press and the international press were alerted.
From Castleton set out the team of rescuers on their last bid to save Neil Moss. The young man was trapped far in Peak Cavern, a mile and a half from the entrance, 1,000 feet underground.
The entrance was becoming increasingly full of people. Some recognised, many not. Were they cavers? If so, how capable were they? Or were they perhaps just press dressed like cavers? One of those that responded was a young Chuck Hooley, who would later become long-time president of the Derbyshire Cave Rescue Organisation.
Well, there was a very firm control on the gate. He assessed people. Otherwise, the whole cavern would have been flooded with people.
But the story of cave rescue started well before the Peak Cavern incident. Back in 1934, caving was already gaining in popularity, and there were already several active caving clubs within the Yorkshire Dales. In October that year, an accident and the resulting operation was to emphasise the need for a properly equipped cave rescue team. 28-year-old Reg Wheatman slipped here in what was then the final chamber of Jingling Hole on Fountains Fell, dislodging a muddy boulder which broke his leg. A long, extended and somewhat improvised cave rescue operation followed. By February the following year, several clubs had come together to form the first cave rescue association, not just in Britain, but in the world. This letter to Tot Lord of Settle appointed him as rescue warden, together with Norman Thornber, Reg Hainsworth and Godfrey Wilson. The equipment list was modest: Neil Robertson's stretcher, surgical haversack, 2 hot water bottles, rubber ground sheet, 2 storm lanterns, oversized primus stove, large kettle, pulley block, and an unbreakable thermos flask. But caving then was not like caving is today.
It is a never-ending source of wonderment to the explorer, if only because of its potholes.
Allen Pop was already a popular place to explore, and it was here that England was to experience its first real caving fatality. 42-year-old schoolteacher Mabel Binks was one of a huge team of 37 making the descent that day. Leeds Pennine Club members were escorting a group of schoolteachers. Mabel had reached this spot at the bottom of the pitch below the bridge when a sizable rock fell from above. It shattered, and a huge fragment delivered a fatal blow to her head. Newspaper headlines and the inquest both suggested that it was deliberately thrown from the surface. But was it? A letter to the clubs from Rescue Secretary Chris Downham criticised such large groups and also suggested the use of head protection. He seemed to have forgotten this picture of him rope climbing in Sunset Pot just 6 years earlier. A handwritten list of rescues survives. On April the 14th, 1936, a 20-foot fall in marble steps. It appears a rung of the rope ladder slipped, which was not unusual, but the climber had his candle in his hand and was also not on a lifeline. He luckily survived with bruises, but he seemed unrepentant. Nevertheless, he was well cared for. An incident on October the 2nd, 1938, when several members of the Bradford Pothole Club were missing. They were eventually located at the bottom of the 90-foot entrance pitch of Pennygent Long Churn, not only stuck by flat water, but their rope ladder had broken. They said because it was saturated. Then during the rescue, the cave rescue ladder also broke. The reality was that hemp or sisal ladders and ropes not only absorbed a huge weight of water when wet, but if put away wet, they were subject to rotting. Yorkshire was soon not alone in having a cave rescue team. Down in Mendip, of course, the cavers were much more sensible. Could it be they were simply better equipped and much more careful? Whatever, the new rescue team would soon be needed. In March 1938, two young cyclists set off down Sidcot Swallet with their bicycle lamps and a couple of candles. They got lost, their lights failed, and they spent a cold night awaiting rescue. Then in August the following year, a lad was trapped by his foot after dislodging a boulder in Goat Church Cavern. All were successfully rescued. Rescue pre-war could not have been without its problems. Few people had personal telephones and call-out was difficult. Personal transport, both for the cave explorers and the rescuers, was somewhat limited. Not that public transport was that great either. Back in Yorkshire, more dramatic rescues. In October 1938, a caver was injured by a fall in marble steps. But more tragic events were to occur here at Rounton Pot in Kingsdale the following year. This young man, John Lambert, of the Leeds Cave Club, was returning to the surface when, after a 120-foot climb, he decided to rest on the Greasy Rock Bridge. Tragically, with the lifeline slack, he slipped and fell, taking the lifeliner by surprise. He landed on a ledge just above where his friends were waiting below. He was already seriously hurt. But before the rescue team could arrive, a violent thunderstorm would trap the five still left below, and the unfortunate Lambert would then be washed off the ledge to his death. A protracted all-night rescue operation followed, and Lambert's body would not be recovered until 6 a.m. the following day. Then came the war. With most of the young men at war, caving continued somehow. Transport was difficult to find. With our scoutmaster gone, Bertie Bradshaw and his scout friends from Blackburn were left to their own devices.
I got a bike which got me up there nobly for years, and all we did was go down little simple holes, usually that didn't need a lot of tackle. I can remember, now don't ask me how ever we got there. We finished up and went down Short Drop. You see, all we got was candles. Little candles, and I had a technique for normal pitches. If I had a candle, I'd blow it out and put it in my pocket. When I look back, I think, God, you fool, you know.
The war was over. Some of those returning would turn to caving as a source of adventure, freedom and companionship.
People didn't have all their own equipment in the way of ladders and whatnot. Still being rope and hemp and sisal and wooden rungs. We all piled onto a bus, and I think 20 odd of us or more would go down Allen Pot or wherever we chose.
The British Speleological Association, the BSA, branded launched back in 1935 as the central organising body for cave exploration and science in Britain, was in disarray. It was now becoming little more than a caving club. The sometimes antagonistic attitude of the secretary, Eli Simpson, had not helped. He had provoked personal disputes with most of the remaining officers of the pre-war Central Cave Rescue. This would have a bearing on tragic events that were soon to follow. The pre-war Central Cave Rescue Organisation had only just been reformed in June 1946 and then renamed the Cave Rescue Organisation. In the coming months, they would face new challenges. In December that year, a team of just 3 BSA members, Bob Leakey, his cousin Raymond Gillibrand, and Leakey's old army climbing companion Harold Sargent, made an arduous all-night trip down the recently discovered AG Pot on the slopes of Ingleborough. Probably it had been left laddered from Arthur Gemmell's first exploration. Nevertheless, with a 3-man team, it was still an ambitious, possibly foolhardy undertaking. The return to the surface was to prove wet and more difficult, the result of overnight rain. They eventually reached the final ladder at 2:30 p.m. the following day, and Sargent was showing signs of heavy fatigue.
Eventually he didn't seem very well, and so this cousin of mine climbed up the 20-foot or 40-foot ladder, and so did I, so he could pull Sargent up. And we got him halfway up the ladder when suddenly he fell off the line, you see, and crashed down into the water.
Although Sargent appeared to be hardly injured, they clearly needed help. There was no choice. Leakey stayed with him while Raymond Gillibrand was sent to raise the alarm. After a full all-night hard caving trip, Gillibrand now faced a 3-mile run down the moor to the village of Clapham, where he'd left his motorbike, and then a half-hour drive to Settle and the BSA headquarters. Eli Simpson underestimated the seriousness of the situation. He felt the BSA alone could deal with it, and sent Tot Lord to investigate.
And by the time the rescue came, he was dead.
The inquest would be highly critical of both the BSA and of cave rescue arrangements. It was time for a rethink.
CRO were criticised, but in fact wrongly. It was more to do with their relationship of the Eli Simpson with the caver, with Bob Leakey and the likes, and they failed miserably to call upon help from CRO.
In late 1949, the newly formed Northern Pennine Club had made an extraordinary discovery on the slopes of Pen y Ghent. They dug out a drafting sinkhole, discovering a long wet crawl, which led to a series of ladder pitches. The cave would prove 1 mile long and 527 foot deep. It was now the deepest and considered the most difficult pothole descent in Britain. By 1951, the Northern Pennine needed a break from exploration. A team of BSA members were quick to take advantage. The leader, Bob Leakey, took this photograph in Boulder Chamber. The team included some of the hardest cavers in the BSA who intended to produce their own survey. Less experienced 20-year-old Williams from North Wales was also there. 2 other less capable members had already turned back, but he said that he wished to reach the bottom. It would prove a fateful decision. As they had already been underground 12 hours, the climb out would be particularly arduous. The ladder climbs follow one another in quick succession. They had heavy, saturated, wet clothing and faced long waits between the climbs. Surveyor Frank Atkinson remembers.
By that point, I was still trying to finish off the survey, and Bob, right and properly, was coming up at the back to follow up and dealing with this rather unable and young potholer. Between us, we were helping this young chap along.
At 3 a.m, a desperately tired Williams started up the big pitch, the third from the entrance, and a 135-foot ladder climb. But having reached the ledge 90 foot up, he collapsed and was unable to continue.
And I laid myself on the top of the pitch. It was very low pitch, and I was laid along that, looking over the edge and talking to Bob now and again. And he was looking after this young chap who was slowly dying, though we didn't really realise it.
I managed to get him into a place where I could lie against him and keep him warm. I found I was the last person nursing him. All the other people had gone out to call the CRO in.
And by then it was realised that the chap had died, or was dying, but quite definitely.
And then Jim Ayres and all the cavers came down, and all they did do was put a rope down for me to tie him onto.
Once more, for the very worst reasons, caving was hitting the headlines and questions were being asked. But more was soon to follow. All the major clubs were keen to get down Pen-y-ghent Pod. Only 3 weeks after the death of Williams, there was another accident. This time, it was a fit 30-year-old member of the Craven Pothole Club, who fell from a ladder deep in the cave. 2 of the team stayed with him, while others went for help. It was to be Cave Rescue's biggest test yet, but already lessons were being learned. Bob Leakey would be involved yet again, and came up with a very strong one-piece suit fitted with attached hauling loops to get Franklin up the pitches. 2 inner tubes helped him through the long entrance crawl, but nevertheless, with injuries including 2 broken ribs, it was painful. Over 100 cavers would take part in the operation, but after 36 hours, he reached the surface. His endurance was seen as amazing. He was a hero, and the cave rescue teams were once again also heroes. Nevertheless, the public image of caving suffered. There were calls for Pen-y-ghent Cave entrance to be sealed forever, not the least by the farmer. But the biggest impact on rescue teams throughout the country was to be the events in Peak Cavern in 1959.
Hugh Kidd had certified the death of Neil Moss at around 3 a.m. on Tuesday morning. This was passed to Chief Inspector Sheffield, who made the official announcement to waiting press.
Naval, Civil Defence, Mining and RAF mountain rescuers sent men and equipment to Castleton. Helping these men was June Bailey, 18, a Manchester typist. She crawled to within 40 feet of the young man before foul air drove the brave girl back. She and all the others wriggled through slime hour after hour while the life of an adventurous man almost within touching distance ebbed away. Flight Lieutenant John Carter, RAF doctor, was in the cave 14 hours before Neil died. Urged by the spirit of adventure, Neil Moss, young, full of promise, lost his life.
One effect of all this was to heighten the public perception that anyone that caved was mad. Some even wanted to ban it altogether. Although the rescue attempt was a valiant team effort, sections of the media created their own stars, which included June Bailey, a young photogenic female caver, specially imported and credited with all manner of heroics. She subsequently found further but fleeting fame through journals. Les Salmon, one of the real heroes of the rescue, subsequently bore the brunt of the inevitable questions on the reasons for the failure to get Neil out alive. The aftermath also brought with it a fair degree of soul-searching among the rescue services, including the DCRO, and I asked Chuck what the likely outcome would be today in the event of a similar incident.
I think if it happened again, knowledge of the problems involved at the time, particularly of foul air, I think would be paramount, and I'm sure that we would probably do more now with the modern equipment we've got of getting a fresh air supply down there. We know a lot more about CO2 and its effect than we ever did then.